The first phone call I ever made in a crisis was to my mother. The last phone call she ever needed to make in hers was to me. That's not a coincidence. That's a bond built over 53 years, one ordinary act of love at a time. There are three kinds of people in a crisis: the ones who move immediately, the ones who stand by and watch, and the ones who calculate exactly how much they can profit from your tragedy. My wife, Victoria, belonged to the third kind. She thought an 82-year-old woman's left arm going numb was just a minor scheduling conflict she didn't have room for in her social calendar. She didn't realize that her calculated coldness at the top of the stairs would cost her a quiet, legal eviction from a $1.8 million legacy she had been eyeing for over a decade. Trust me, you are going to want to see how this one ends. If you believe that loyalty deserves a legacy and greed deserves a reckoning, take a second right now to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing, but it helps us keep these quiet victories of justice alive. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let's get settled. My name is Thomas Watson. I'm 53 years old. By trade, I'm a mechanical engineer, a man who spends his weeks analyzing stress points in industrial machinery, looking for the exact moment a structure fails under pressure. On weekends, I coach youth baseball, teaching young boys that a team only works if you actually show up for the person standing next to you. I've spent the last 11 years of my marriage operating under the foolish assumption that keeping the peace was the same thing as having peace. It wasn't. It just meant I was absorbing all the friction so someone else could live smoothly. It was a Wednesday morning, January 14th, at exactly 7:42 a.m. I remember the digital clock on the microwave glowing in the dim light of our Hartford kitchen. I was standing there watching the coffee drip, slowly, when my phone buzzed against the granite counter. The caller ID read Mom. Rebecca Watson was not a complicated woman. She didn't need to be. She was the kind of mother who lived quietly on a fixed income in the white colonial house with the green shutters on Maplewood Drive. The house my father built brick by careful brick and paid off entirely in 2009. She survived a husband's passing, a recession, and a full hip replacement without ever asking a single soul for a handout. She didn't do weak. So when I picked up on the second ring and heard her voice, my chest went tight. It was thin. "Thomas," she said. She was breathing shallowly. "I didn't want to bother you, baby." "Mom, what's wrong?" I was already moving toward the hallway, my car keys instinctively in my hand. "It's just a funny tightness in my chest, and my left arm keeps going a bit numb. I'm sure it's nothing." "Mom, stop. Stay exactly where you are. Unlock the front door and sit down. I'm coming right now." I hung up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned to the key rack by the door, ready to sprint. Then, the cold wall of reality hit me. My truck, a 2019 Chevy Silverado, wasn't in the driveway. It was sitting on a lift at Kowalski's Auto on Flatbush Street with a dead alternator. And it wasn't there by accident. Just last Thursday, Danny Kowalski had called to tell me the alternator was failing and needed immediate replacement. The cost was $650. When I told Victoria, she pitched a fit right here in this kitchen. She slammed her laptop shut and claimed we couldn't afford unnecessary mechanical luxuries this month because she needed to finalize the deposits for her upcoming weekend spa getaway in Vermont with Joanne and her friends. She demanded I cancel the appointment, telling me the truck could survive another 2 weeks on a jump start. I chose to keep the peace. I delayed the repair. And now, on a freezing Wednesday morning, with my mother's heart sending distress signals 4 miles away, I stood in my hallway completely stranded, holding keys to a vehicle that couldn't start, staring out the window at Victoria's silver Honda Curve sitting fat, fully fueled, and untouchable in the driveway. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, the useless keys to my broken-down Silverado digging into the meat of my palm. Upstairs, the heavy, rhythmic hum of the shower finally died down. A long, agonizing pause followed. The silence stretched for 30 seconds before the bathroom door clicked open. "Victoria!" I called out, my voice strained, fighting to keep the rising panic from choking my words. "Victoria, I need your keys." My mom just called. She's having severe chest pains and her left arm is going numb. I need to take her to St. Francis right now. Another silence. It wasn't the silence of someone processing shock or processing fear. It was the deliberate, quiet calculation of someone weighing an inconvenience against her schedule. When she finally stepped out to the top of the landing, she was wrapped snugly in her plush white robe, a dry towel twisted neatly over her hair. Her face was completely unreadable, devoid of a single flicker of concern. She leaned casually against the wooden banister, crossing her arms over her chest. "Thomas, I can't today," she said, her tone as flat as a weather report. "Victoria, did you hear me?" I took 2 heavy steps up the stairs, staring at her. Her left arm is going numb. Those are classic signs of a myocardial infarction. She doesn't have time. "I heard you perfectly fine, Thomas," she replied, rolling her eyes with a sigh of sheer annoyance. "So call an ambulance. You know how busy my Wednesdays are." I have a full day of remote consultations, and tonight is my dinner at the Capitol Grill with Joanne and the girls. I'm not going to ruin my entire day sitting in a sterile hospital waiting room for something that's probably just acid reflux. I froze on the 3rd step. I looked up at the woman I had shared a bed with for 11 years. I looked at the pristine, expensive crown molding, the hardwood floors, and the life I had meticulously engineered and financed so she could live without a single worry. My voice came out quieter than I expected, a low, dangerous vibration. An ambulance takes 20 minutes to dispatch out to Maplewood, Victoria. Her arm is numb. Figure it out. She let out a dry, humorless chuckle and took a step back toward the bedroom. "Then figure it out yourself, Thomas. She's your mother, not mine." But she didn't just stop there. Before she closed the door, she turned around, her eyes narrowing as she looked down at me from the top of the stairs. "And before you run off, leave your Chase Sapphire card on the kitchen counter. I'm stopping by the luxury spa in West Hartford for a full body treatment before dinner, and my personal account is a little low this week. Don't forget." The door clicked shut. No slam. Just a gentle, precise closure. I stood in the quiet of my own hallway, a cold, absolute clarity washing over me. In that single, frozen moment, the illusion of my 11-year marriage dissolved entirely. I wasn't looking at a partner who had simply lost her temper. I was looking at a parasite, a cold, calculating creature that had spent over a decade feeding off my hard work, my patience, and my family's kindness, yet couldn't spare a single gallon of gasoline to save my mother's life. I didn't waste another 3 seconds staring at that closed bedroom door. I pulled out my phone and scrolled past my wife's name down to the letter C. Clinton Webb lived exactly 4 houses down on our block of Asylum Avenue. He was 71 years old, a retired union electrician who had spent 40 years working with his hands. He drove a faded, well-kept 2004 Honda Civic that looked like it had survived 3 separate wars but never missed a single morning startup. Clinton was a man of the old school. He still shook hands with a grip like iron and believed a man's word was a binding contract. He had known my parents for 22 years, and at my father's funeral in 2014, he had sat quietly in the front row, holding my mother's coat. He picked up on the very first ring. "Wes, what's the play, brother?" "Clinton, I'm in a bad spot," I said, my chest tight. "My truck's alternator is dead on Flatbush. Mom just called me from her place. She's having chest pains and a numb arm. Victoria's car isn't available. Can you get us to St. Francis?" There was no pause, no checking of a calendar, no mention of dinner plans. "Give me 3.5 minutes," Clinton said firmly. "I'll pull up right to your driveway. Get your coat." He hung up, true to his word. The low purr of his old Honda Civic rattled into my driveway exactly 3 minutes and 40 seconds later. I threw myself into the passenger seat, and we tore down the icy streets of Hartford toward Maplewood Drive. When we pulled up to my mother's white Colonial, the front door was already unlocked. She was sitting on her small wooden bench in the foyer, wearing her good blue wool coat, the one she only wore to Sunday service or important occasions. Her small leather purse was clutched tightly in both her hands. Her skin was a terrifying shade of gray, and beads of cold sweat lined her forehead, but she still managed a faint, apologetic smile as I lifted her up and helped her into the back seat of Clinton's car. "I'm so sorry to make a fuss, Clinton," she whispered, her voice shallow and weak as I climbed into the back beside her, wrapping her small, trembling hand inside both of mine. "I'm sure it's just a little indigestion. I didn't mean to ruin your morning." "Save your breath, Rebecca," Clinton said softly, watching her through the rearview mirror as he smoothly navigated the car onto the connector road. I was just watching the morning news anyway, and God knows there's nothing good on there. You're doing me a favor. The drive to St. Francis Hospital on Woodland Street normally took 15 minutes, but Clinton cut through the side streets with the practiced precision of a man who knew every pothole in Hartford. As the old Civic hit a stretch of asphalt lined with barren oak trees, my mother leaned her head back against the worn fabric of the seat. She squeezed my hand with a sudden, desperate surge of strength, her breathing hitching sharply. "Thomas," she panted, her eyes tightly shut against a wave of pain. I need to tell you something. Before we get there, just in case." "Don't talk, Mom. Just breathe. We're 5 minutes away," I urged, leaning closer. "No, listen to me," she insisted, a sudden, sharp clarity piercing through her weakness. "Victoria, your wife. She came to my house last Thursday afternoon, while you were at the baseball field." I frowned, my heart skipping a beat. "Victoria went to see you? She didn't tell me that. She didn't want you to know," my mother whispered, her lips pale. She brought a bottle of wine. She sat at my kitchen table, and she started asking questions. Thomas. Very specific questions. She wanted to know if the deed to the Maplewood house was fully cleared. She wanted to know if your father's old investment portfolios at Fidelity were structured to bypass probate court and whose name was listed as the primary beneficiary on the trust. She told me she was just helping us plan for the future. But her eyes looked like an appraiser looking at a piece of scrap metal. A sickening wave of ice-cold adrenaline flooded my veins, freezing me right where I sat. The leaves outside flew past the window like a blur of broken glass. Victoria hadn't just been indifferent this morning. She had been calculating. She had already been circling my mother's estate like a vulture over a dying animal, counting the square footage of the colonial house, calculating the net worth of my father's 30 years of sacrifice, all while planning her weekend spa trips on my dime. She knew exactly what a cardiac event at 82 years old meant. She wasn't avoiding a minor scheduling conflict at the top of the stairs. She was quietly waiting for nature to do the dirty work of clearing her path to the money. I looked down at my mother's frail hand in mine, and then I looked out at the gray Hartford skyline. The anger in my chest didn't burn hot. It turned into a freezing, silent resolve. Victoria wanted to play a game of numbers and assets. She wanted to treat my mother's life as a legal technicality. She had no idea that she had just handed me the scalpel, and I was about to dissect her entire life, piece by legal piece. St. Francis Hospital was a chaotic hive of noise and fluorescent light on that Wednesday morning. We crossed the threshold of the emergency room at exactly 8:27 a.m. Clinton stayed right by my side, helping me guide my mother into a vinyl chair while a triage nurse named Beverly, a woman with broad shoulders and the exhausted, no-nonsense eyes of someone who had seen every medical crisis twice, immediately recognized the gray pallor on my mother's face. Within 12 minutes, they had Rebecca Watson back in a curtained cubicle, hooked up to a multi-lead ECG monitor that began its rhythmic, high-pitched chirping. The physician on call was a tall man named Dr. Raymond Cole. He had calm, deliberate hands and a soft Hartford accent that carried the weight of absolute authority. For 2 hours and 40 minutes, I sat in that waiting room. I watched a mounted television in the corner playing a game show on absolute mute. I drank 2 cups of the worst black coffee of my life from an old vending machine near the elevators, a liquid that tasted like burnt plastic and deep regret, though I didn't taste a single sip. My phone sat face down on my knee. Not a single text arrived from Victoria. Not an inquiry into whether her mother-in-law was alive, breathing, or dead. At 11:04 a.m., Dr. Cole pushed through the double swinging doors of the wing. His expression was measured, his surgical cap pulled down low. He caught my eye and gestured with his chin toward a quiet alcove near the secure exit, away from the bustling nurses' station. "Mr. Watson," Doc Cole said, his voice dropping to a low, confidential tone as he leaned his shoulder against the brick wall. "Your mother had what we classify as a transient ischemic event paired with an acute coronary syndrome. In layman's terms, it was a mild cardiac warning shot. Her enzyme levels, specifically her troponin T levels, spiked right at the threshold. We've stabilized her with a nitroglycerin drip and high-dose enoxaparin to clear the arterial blockage. I let out a shaky breath. But she's stable? Dr. Cole looked at me, his eyes dead serious over the rim of his glasses. She is stable now, Thomas. But I need you to understand something. If you had arrived even 10 minutes later, that partial blockage in her carotid artery would have become a complete occlusion. She would have suffered a massive, catastrophic ischemic stroke. At 82 years old, that means permanent, irreversible paralysis or total cognitive deficit. 10 minutes. Whoever got her into that car saved her mind and her life. My hands began to shake inside my jacket pockets. 10 minutes. If I had listened to Victoria. If I had spent 20 minutes waiting for an ambulance to dispatch out to the suburbs, or if I had stayed at the bottom of the stairs arguing with her about her social calendar. My mother would be a shell of herself right now, trapped inside a broken body. Dr. Cole patted my shoulder and told me I could see her in 20 minutes once they moved her to the intermediate care unit. I sat back down in the hard plastic chair, my chest burning with a cold, quiet rage. I pulled out my phone to text Clinton, who was still waiting out in the parking lot like a sentinel. But before I could open the messages, a banner notification flashed across the top of my screen. It was an automated alert from our joint Chase checking account. Transaction approved, $2,419.62 at Saks Fifth Avenue, West Hartford. The timestamp was 11:01 a.m. while drive. Cole was checking my mother's cardiac enzymes and telling me how close she had come to permanent brain damage. My wife was standing in a high-end boutique, handing over our shared debit card to purchase a designer dress for her dinner with Joanne and the girls. She didn't call. She didn't check in. She just swiped the card. I stared at the numbers. $2,419. The exact price of an absolute betrayal. Some people spend their entire lives making massive withdrawals from relationships they never bothered to deposit a single cent into. They believe that family bonds are a blank check, and that elderliness is just a vulnerability to be exploited. But when greed blinds you to human decency, the law becomes the ultimate equalizer. If you believe that those who stand by the hospital bed deserve the legacy, and those who spend the money during a crisis deserve the fallout, take a moment right now to hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below with your city and state. Your subscription ensures that these quiet, legal victories continue to be told. Now, let's see how the trap was set. When I walked into room 412, the color had crawled back into my mother's cheeks. She had refused the standard-issue hospital gown and was already sitting up in her own pale blue nightgown, her reading glasses perched squarely on the bridge of her nose. A crossword puzzle book was open in her lap. 7 letters. Thomas, she said without looking up, her voice regaining that sharp, New England snap that had governed our household for 50 years. A breach of faith. A violation of trust. I stopped in the doorway, a faint smile breaking through my exhaustion. Betrayal, Mom. Betrayal, she repeated, counting the squares with the tip of her pen. PERFIDY also fits, but let's stick with betrayal. It's more accurate for the current climate. She closed the book with a sharp click and set it on the rolling bedside table. She looked at me with eyes that were entirely clear, devoid of any medication-induced fog. Victoria didn't come, she stated. It wasn't a question. No, Mom, I said quietly, pulling the plastic chair close to her mattress. She had a full day of work, and then dinner at the Capitol Grill with Joanne. My mother nodded slowly. She reached into her small leather purse, sitting on the nightstand, and pulled out her reading glasses case. Tucked inside was a small, cream-colored business card with a raised gold crest. Harrison Vance, attorney at law, estate and asset protection. Call Harrison, she said, her voice steady as a heartbeat. Tell him I need him here by 2 p.m. with his notary public and a clean legal pad. I hesitated, looking at the card. Mom, you just came out of the You don't need to stress yourself with legalities today. Thomas Andrew Watson, she said, using the full name voice that meant compliance was non-negotiable. Do not finish that sentence. 6 years ago, after your father passed, Harrison drew up my standard last will and testament. I was emotional, and I wanted to ensure you were taken care of. That document currently stipulates that upon my passing, the Maplewood Drive property, which is fully paid off and appraised at $680,000, Along with your father's Fidelity investment portfolios totaling $1.1 million would be transferred to you and Victoria as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. It leaves 70% of my life's work under her partial legal control. She leaned forward, her small, wrinkled hands clamping over mine with a grip that felt like steel. I am not angry, Thomas. Anger is an emotional waste of time. I am simply accurate. Your father and I scrimped, saved, and skipped vacations for 40 years to build that capital so it would secure a future for people who understand what loyalty actually means. Victoria has made it abundantly clear that she views my existence as a scheduling conflict and my estate as a pending paycheck. A person who is absent during the agony has zero right to be present during the distribution. She tapped the card against my palm. We are restructuring everything into an irrevocable spendthrift trust today. I want Harrison to strip her name entirely from every clause, every asset, and every cent. If she wants to live a life of luxury dinners and $2,000 dresses, she can finance it herself. My family's blood equity will never fund her arrogance. I looked at the card, then back at my mother. The trap was no longer just a thought in the back of my mind. It was a formal, legal mechanism being forged in a sterile hospital room, and Victoria was about to walk right into it, entirely unawares. Mr. Harrison Vance arrived at room 412 at exactly 1:58 p.m. He was a man who understood that power doesn't need to shout. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal gray wool suit, carrying a weathered tan leather briefcase, and sporting a silver haircut cut close to the scalp, he looked every bit the 31-year veteran of Hartford County estate law. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He shook my hand firmly, nodded to my mother with deep professional respect, and immediately pulled up a vinyl chair. Out of his briefcase came a yellow legal pad and a Mont Blanc fountain pen that probably cost more than the alternator I was waiting on. For the next 47 minutes, the atmosphere in that sterile hospital room shifted from medical vulnerability to cold, calculated financial warfare. I sat quietly in the corner, a silent witness to the systematic dismantling of my wife's ambitions. Harrison Vance was not interested in Victoria's hurt feelings or her dinner reservations. He was interested in the preservation of blood equity. He listened intently as my mother detailed the events of the past week, his pen scratching rhythmically against the yellow paper. When she finished, Vance capped his pen with a sharp, metallic click and looked over the rim of his glasses, his eyes gleaming with tactical precision. Mrs. Watson, removing Victoria from a standard will is simple, but it is also dangerous, Vance explained, his voice low and measured. If we merely scratch her name from a traditional testament, she can still mount a legal challenge after your passing, claiming undue influence. Furthermore, if she detects this shift and decides to file for divorce from Thomas tomorrow, an aggressive family court lawyer could argue that your eventual inheritance constitutes marital property subject to equitable distribution. We are not going to leave her that loophole. Vance leaned forward, tapping his finger on the legal pad. We are going to execute an irrevocable trust with an explicit spendthrift clause today. We will transfer the title of the Maplewood Drive property, currently appraised at $650,000, the Fidelity investment portfolios totaling $1.1 million, and even your late husband's fully restored 1967 Ford Mustang directly into the legal ownership of this trust. Thomas will be named the sole primary beneficiary, and my firm will act as the independent trustee. I watched as my mother nodded, a cold look of absolute satisfaction settling over her face. The beauty of an irrevocable trust with a spendthrift clause, Vance continued, looking back at me. Is that under Connecticut general statutes? The assets no longer belong to your mother, nor do they belong to you, Thomas. They belong entirely to the trust. Because you do not own the principal, the assets cannot be touched by any future divorce court, any Marshall Asset Division, or any liability claims. Even if Victoria files for a high-conflict divorce and demands 50% of your life, the family court judge legally possesses zero jurisdiction over this trust. It is an absolute fortress. Victoria can spend the next 10 years dreaming of this money, but legally, she exists outside the walls. When my mother signed the final page at 2:45 p.m., verified by Vance's traveling notary public, the document that Victoria had spent 11 years counting on was fundamentally and irrevocably dead. She was completely shut out, locked in a financial vacuum of her own making, while she was still picking at the breadbasket at the Capitol Grill. By Friday morning, the air in Hartford was crisp and honest. I stood at the counter of Kowalski's Auto on Flatbush Street at 8:14 a.m., handing over $650 to Danny Kowalski for the new alternator. My truck hummed to life with a deep, steady rumble that felt like the first stable thing in my life in days. By 8:53 a.m., I was back at St. Francis Hospital, signing the discharge papers. My mother adamantly refused the mandatory hospital wheelchair the moment she cleared the sliding glass doors, walking independently to the passenger side of my Silverado with her good blue coat buttoned tightly to her chin. The drive back to the white Colonial on Maplewood Drive was spent in a comfortable, healing silence. The house sat quiet and familiar under the winter sun, the porch swept clean, the welcome mat still holding its faded, honest greeting. I got her inside, removed her coat, and guided her to her favorite chair at the kitchen table. The same oak table where she had helped me with algebra 35 years ago. I filled the kettle and prepared her tea. It had to be chamomile, 2 bags, steeped for exactly 4 minutes. Not 3, not 5, 4. My father had taught me that precision, and it was a ritual I performed with absolute devotion while the kitchen clock ticked quietly on the wall. I placed the steaming porcelain mug in front of her. She wrapped her small, warm hands around the porcelain, looking up at me through her reading glasses. The frail, thin voice from Wednesday morning was entirely gone, replaced by the unshakable weight of a matriarch who had made her peace with a hard truth. "Thomas," she said softly, watching the steam rise. "Sit down." I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. She reached into her apron pocket, but she didn't pull out her crossword book. Instead, she slid a small, heavy piece of stamped brass across the oak table. It was a safe deposit box key, bearing the engraved emblem of the Chase Bank branch on Main Street. "What is this, Mom?" I asked, looking at the cold metal. "That key opens box 412, she said, her voice dropping to a low, steady register. "I didn't tell you this before, Thomas, because I didn't want to destroy the peace in your home. But 3 years ago, I added Victoria as an authorized secondary signer on my local checking account, purely so she could pick up my groceries or pay my utility bills if my hip flared up. I trusted her. But my bank statements started arriving with small, odd discrepancies. $40 here, $100 there. Then, hundreds of dollars a month, always disguised as automated transfers or online pharmacy withdrawals. My chest tightened as I stared at the key. "Mom, did she steal from you?" She embezzled exactly $14,280 over a 36-month period. "Thomas," my mother stated, her eyes entirely devoid of tears, carrying only the hard reality of a ledger. "She used my secondary account to fund her luxury skincare subscriptions and boutique clothing purchases, thinking a lonesome old woman wouldn't notice a few $100s slipping out of a pension deposit. I didn't confront her. I didn't tell you because I knew it would break your heart, and I wasn't ready to watch you suffer. But every time she stole, I went to the bank. I requested certified teller logs, digital IP tracking sheets for every online transaction, and notarized fraud affidavits from the branch manager. They are all sitting inside that safe deposit box." She tapped her finger on the brass key, sliding it directly into my palm. "I kept those documents as a shield to protect myself, Thomas. But today, I am giving them to you as a sword." Victoria believes she is the smartest person in the room. She believes she can walk away from your marriage with half of everything you've earned while treating your family like disposable baggage. When you go home to Asylum Avenue today, you take this key. You get those files. You let her know that she isn't just facing an empty inheritance. She is facing documented grand larceny and bank fraud. You are a man who shows up, Thomas. It's time to show her exactly what happens when you finally stop absorbing the friction. I shifted my Chevy Silverado into drive and left the quiet, maple-lined sanctuary of Maplewood Drive at exactly 1:15 p.m. The moment the tires hit the main asphalt of Asylum Avenue, the phone in my cup holder came alive. It didn't just ring. It buzzed with a manic, uninterrupted vibration that felt like a swarm of hornets trapped under glass. I didn't pick it up. I didn't even flip it over. I just watched the screen illuminate the dark interior of my truck cabin over and over again. Victoria, Victoria, Victoria. By the time I pulled up to the red light near the West Hartford line, the The digital counter displayed 34 missed calls, accompanied by 11 text messages that grew progressively shorter, sharper, and more unhinged. Something had exploded in her pristine, calculated world. The source of that explosion became entirely clear the moment I turned into my own driveway. Parked crookedly on the asphalt, blocking the garage doors, was a sleek, midnight blue BMW 5 Series. I recognized the vanity plate immediately. Joanne. My wife's social anchor, her partner in expensive luncheons, and the woman whose presence had been deemed more critical than my mother's failing heart on Wednesday morning. I cut the Silverado's engine. The sudden silence in the truck was heavy, almost clinical. I reached across the seat and picked up the brown manila folder Harrison Vance's courier had handed me an hour prior, along with the heavy brass key to box 412 at Chase Bank. I didn't rush. I stepped out into the biting January air, adjusted my flannel collar, and walked toward the front porch. Through the large bay window of the living room, I could see the silhouettes of two women pacing frantically back and forth. Victoria hadn't discovered the change through a sudden awakening of her conscience. She had discovered it through her most sensitive organ, her finances. Harrison Vance had been brutal in his efficiency, because the asset transfer into the irrevocable spendthrift trust involved a structural change in the primary residence's deed. The Hartford County Clerk's Office had issued an automated, immediate statutory notification via certified electronic mail regarding tax liability adjustments. As a registered joint filer on our household account, the notification had slipped straight into Victoria's inbox at 11:45 a.m., explicitly detailing that her name had been legally severed from the estate of Rebecca Watson due to a comprehensive transfer of ownership to an independent third-party corporate trustee. She had spent 11 years waiting for a payout, and a single automated court notification had vanished it from her spreadsheet before lunch. The moment my key turned in the deadbolt, the door was practically ripped out of my hand from the inside. Victoria stood in the foyer, her expensive silk work blouse wrinkled, her hair, usually a manicured helmet of perfection, completely disheveled. Behind her, Joanne stood near the fireplace, holding a glass of white wine with a face that looked simultaneously terrified and intensely uncomfortable. "Thomas!" Victoria gasped, her voice cracking, reaching out to grab the sleeve of my jacket. Her fingers were trembling violently. "Where have you been? Why haven't you been answering your phone? Do you have any idea what's happening?" "There's been a massive mistake at the county clerk's office. Some fraudulent filing regarding your mother's house and her investments. Her lawyer's office won't take my calls. You need to call Rebecca right now. You need to fix this." I walked past her without making eye contact, hanging my jacket on the peg by the door. I walked into the living room, placed the manila folder flat on the glass coffee table, and sat down in the leather armchair. I looked up at her, my face entirely devoid of the compliance she had spent over a decade taking for granted. "It wasn't a mistake, Victoria," I said, my voice dead, flat, and final. "My mother made those changes deliberately." Harrison Vance finalized the trust structure at 2 p.m. yesterday. Victoria's face drained of color, turning the exact shade of sour milk. She took a step toward the table, her eyes darting to the folder. "Deliberately? For a misunderstanding? Thomas, I was going to come to the hospital. I told you it was a complicated day." I had client calls, and Joanne had already made the reservations weeks ago. "Your mother is 82 years old. She's being overly sensitive and vindictive. You can't let her do this to us. That house, those portfolios, that is our retirement. That is our security. You go back to St. Francis and you tell her to rip those papers up, or so help me God." "She isn't at St. Francis," I interrupted quietly. "I brought her home to Maplewood Drive this morning. Her heart is stable. Her mind is perfectly clear. And the decision is permanent." "I don't care where she is!" Victoria screamed, the careful composure she wore like a second skin shattering completely into raw, ugly desperation. She slammed her palm onto the glass table. "You listen to me, Thomas. I have put 11 years into this marriage. I have endured your boring youth baseball games, your old-fashioned family, and your cheap lifestyle. If you don't call that old woman right now and force her to reinstate my name on that deed and those accounts, I am calling my attorney before 5 o'clock. I will file for divorce by Monday morning, and I will take 50% of this house. 50% of your engineering pension, and I will 60th percent strip you of everything you have ever built. Do you hear me? I will ruin you." Behind her, Joanne quietly set her wine glass down on the mantel, recognizing the exact moment a domestic dispute had crossed into a fatal legal territory. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached forward, opened the manila folder on the table, and pushed two distinct stacks of paper across the glass toward her. "Go ahead and call him, Victoria," I said, leaning back in the chair, crossing my legs. "Let's talk about what happens if you file for divorce in the state of Connecticut." Stack number 1 is the certified copy of the irrevocable trust with a spendthrift clause. As of 2 p.m. yesterday, neither I nor my mother own a single square inch of the Maplewood property or a single cent of the Fidelity funds. They belong entirely to an independent legal entity. Under state law, a family court judge has exactly zero jurisdiction over assets held within an irrevocable third-party trust. You can spend $100,000 on a lawyer, Victoria, but you cannot divide what I do not legally own. You are completely locked out of the inheritance. You get nothing. She stared at the trust document, her chest heaving as the reality of the legal fortress began to sink into her mind. "Now let's look at stack number 2, I continued, my voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper that made Joanne take a step toward the hallway. "Those are certified bank teller logs, digital IP tracking sheets, and notarized fraud affidavits from the main branch of Chase Bank on Main Street. They document exactly $14,280 that you systematically embezzled from my mother's secondary checking account over a 36-month period to fund your boutique shopping sprees." Victoria froze entirely, her breath catching in her throat. She looked down at the bank statements, her eyes widening in absolute horror as she saw her own digital signatures and the IP addresses matching her iPad highlighted in bright yellow ink. "Under Connecticut General Statutes, Section 53-122, I said, tapping my finger on the yellow lines, larceny involving an amount exceeding $10,000 from a victim over the age of 60 is classified as a Class B felony. It carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 1 to 20 years in a state correctional facility, along with federal bank fraud charges because you utilized electronic wire transfers to clear the funds." I pulled a clean, pre-drafted document from the bottom of the folder and slid it toward her along with a black pen. "This is an uncontested, no-fault divorce agreement," I told her, looking straight into the raw fear in her eyes. "It stipulates that you walk away from this marriage immediately, taking only your personal clothes and the silver Honda Curve. You waive all rights to alimony, all rights to my engineering pension, and all claims to this house. You sign it right now, in front of Joanne as your witness, and you pack your bags. If you sign it, these bank fraud files stay in this folder. If you walk out that door without signing, I drive straight to the Hartford Police Department and hand these affidavits to the Detective Bureau. You wanted to calculate costs, Victoria. Now it's your turn. Do you want to sign the papers, or do you want to see what a Class B felony looks like on your permanent record?" The silence in the living room was absolute. Victoria looked at the statements, then at the divorce decree, and finally at me. For 11 years, she thought she was manipulating a simple, quiet man who would always swallow the friction to keep the peace. She finally realized that the man sitting in front of her was an engineer who knew exactly which pillar to pull to bring her entire temple crashing down upon her head. Her knees buckled. With a low, pathetic sob, she collapsed onto her knees against the edge of the coffee table, her manicured fingers trembling as she reached for the black pen. I pulled the heavy wooden door of our Asylum Avenue house shut behind me, the cold, metallic click of the deadbolt signaling the end of an era. As I walked down the front steps, the freezing January air of Hartford hit my face. It was sharp, biting, and completely honest. For 11 years, I had walked down these exact steps, carrying a heavy, suffocating weight in my chest, constantly calculating how to smooth things over, how to absorb the tension, and how to keep a superficial peace with a woman who only valued me as a financial engine. But standing on the sidewalk now, looking at the gray winter sky, I felt an unfamiliar sensation washing over my mind. Absolute, untainted clarity. The suffocating weight was gone. There was no hot rush of anger left in my veins, no bitter desire for further retaliation. There was only the quiet, profound relief of a man who had finally stepped out of a cage he had spent over a decade trying to decorate. 11 years of enduring a parasitic marriage had ended in a single afternoon, resolved cleanly by the unyielding precision of the law. I climbed into my Silverado, the newly repaired alternator purring with a smooth, reliable rhythm. I didn't glance back at the living room window where Victoria was currently sitting on her knees, staring at the ruin of her own calculated greed. Instead, I shifted the truck into drive and steered it away from Asylum Avenue, heading directly toward the familiar, tree-lined block of Maplewood Drive. For the past decade, every single Sunday dinner had been an exercise in emotional survival. I had spent years watching Victoria's face across the dining table, silently gauging her mood, enduring her passive-aggressive sighs about my mother's old-fashioned cooking, and apologizing for things that required no apology, all to prevent an explosive argument on the drive home. But this Sunday was going to be different. This was the first time in 11 years I was arriving at my mother's house entirely unburdened, without having to answer to a toxic social calendar or protect a parasite's delicate sensibilities. When I pulled into the driveway of the white Colonial, the porch light was already casting a warm, golden glow against the winter dusk. I walked straight into the kitchen, greeted instantly by the rich, comforting aroma of roasted garlic, rosemary, and slow-simmered beef broth. My mother was standing by the stove, her reading glasses pushed up onto her silver hair, humming an old tune my father used to whistle in the garage. She looked up as I entered, her clear, steady eyes taking in my face. She didn't ask about the phone calls. She didn't ask about the manila folder or the signed divorce papers. She didn't need to. She saw the clarity in my eyes, and that was all the data she required. "Hand me that wooden spoon, Thomas," she said softly, gesturing toward the counter. "The gravy needs stirring, and you always had a better arm for it," I smiled, taking the spoon from her hand. For the next hour, we worked together in total, healing synergy. I chopped the root vegetables, checked the oven temperature, and stirred the cast-iron pot while she seasoned the roast with the practiced precision of a woman who had kept a household running through every storm life could throw at her. There was no walking on eggshells here. There was no hidden agenda, no calculation of asset values, and no resentment simmering beneath the surface. It was just a mother and her son, sharing a kitchen that felt safer and more sacred than it ever had before. As we finally sat down at the oak kitchen table, the very table where she had helped me with algebra 35 years ago, I looked at her small, worn hands resting against the placemat. These were the hands that had packed my lunches, cheered from the folding chairs at my Little League games, and held mine in the back of Clinton Webb's car while her own heart was sending distress signals to her brain. In that quiet moment, as the refrigerator hummed in the corner and the Hartford wind rattled the outer window panes, the deepest lesson of my life became entirely clear. Loyalty and love are not abstract concepts to be debated over expensive dinners at the Capitol Grill. They are ordinary, quiet acts of discipline. They are defined entirely by the simple, non-negotiable choice of showing up. Victoria had spent 11 years trying to inherit a life she refused to participate in, believing that marriage was a contract for extraction. But my mother had spent 82 years proving that a legacy isn't built on what you take from a family. It is built entirely on who you stand next to when the storm hits. For the first time in my 53 years, I knew I was finally becoming a man worthy of that legacy. I was no longer showing up alone. Loyalty is never a commodity to be negotiated, and a parent's lifelong sacrifice is not an infinite line of credit for selfish people to swipe without consequence. I want to extend a very special thank you to our longtime viewer, Robert Sterling from Boston, Massachusetts, for always standing by this channel and leaving such insightful, profound commentary under our videos. Your continued presence means everything to this community. If the quiet, legal justice in today's story brought a sense of relief and clarity to your day, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next reckoning. Until next time, keep yourselves safe, look out for the ones who truly show up for you, and always stay sharp.